Hello, Internet. My name is Chamomile.
And I'm Camile's official consultant on man sexiness.
It's an important job, when you're
Yeah.
running a YouTube Let's Play Stroke podcast.
There's a pretty good big retainer you gave me. I don't know why you put so much money in the man sexiness budget.
I mean, it's vital. You can't skimp out on this. You get what you pay for, and this is. I know I had a reason why this was important, and I'm sure it was a good one. So,
Well, unfortunately, in this case, in the case of this game, most of the men are just kind of uncanny looking.
and now I know that officially. I can
I get it was 2005, and there's limits on the technology, but
uh,
I know you said you didn't really find Jeanette that attractive, but I can look at Jeanette and see that is supposed to be an attractive woman at least.
this is true. She's definitely supposed to come across as attractive, and I'm sure she would have worked for the basic bitch straight men where big tits and scanty clothes is enough. Full stop. I have a refined palate. I'm a connoisseur of sexy video game women. Thank you very much.
Who's your favorite then?
That is a good question. I can't actually think of any off the top of my head. And I hope it was. I hope it came across that that was supposed to sound ridiculous and dumb. Um, yeah, it's. I'm only half joking, but I realize it's a weird and niche thing to be a gourmand for. Yeah. JRPGs are good about this kind of thing a lot. Uh, Particularly, JRPGs are usually, and this is kind of odd to bring up because we just got off Kingdom Hearts a couple of episodes ago, where it's probably its biggest problem with its story is that Kairi is practically a non-entity in it. But JRPGs are usually pretty good at giving their female characters an actual personality. If I'm spending uh, hours, tens, dozens of hours with a character, then she's going to get real grating if she is hollow or just annoying to put up with. Whatever impression, even if her design is really good and really attractive, whatever impression that makes, it's going to wear down after that much time. Do you not want
That
drugs?
is fair. Are you trying
He
to get
doesn't want drugs.
drugs?
No, I'm trying to give him drugs. I got drugs for him.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a couple of side quests that between episodes I looked up everything I missed and wrote it down so that I wouldn't spend a bunch of time running around in circles like I did last time. Uh,
Oh, and you do have the notes you gave me.
yes, I'm not sure if this will be necessary because I knew what I was looking for this time. To write down. The first time through, I read a guide on Santa Monica. I just kind of skimmed over the whole thing, and I've played this game before. I had just read what all the quests were. I kind of hoped that would be enough, and I remembered what was a quest that existed. I didn't remember how to actually do any of them though, which led to me kind of thinking to myself, okay, I know, and I'm not gonna spoil it just in case someone doesn't know, but it's I know where this whole bounty hunting quest is leading, but I forget most of the steps between A and Z, so. But I'm pretty sure I've got them all now, and if I do get lost, I can just ask you, and you'll have a little cheat sheet of answers for me.
Indeed.
And we need to get seduction.
Yeah.
3 dots in that just as fast as possible. because having constantly minimal blood points is actually a huge nuisance when we're relying on blood buff for everything
Yeah.
to pick every lock.
Copying
Especially,
blood's gonna.
we're also potentially relying on yeah, we're potentially relying on um, Auspex, which does boost wits, to do hacking. So
Yeah.
speaking of which,
So
oh yeah, no,
we gotta go to
we're
the
cracking
Barnes and
that one.
Noble, the LA Barnes and Noble, and go to the relationship section and see what we can find. That's where Cotula used to work, so she'll get a discount.
I mean, she's still technically employed there. How
Yeah,
long has
she's
it
still
been since?
technically assistant manager.
Like, yeah, it's only been probably a couple of nights, right? Like, they're probably getting to the point where they're seriously considering firing her, but haven't quite done it yet. And the manager is still waiting for her to come back in so he can give her a lecture about it. I guess it depends on how much, just how asshole the L.A. Barnes and Noble is. Yeah, the tattoo parlor. Where is that located?
Can vampires get tattoos?
I mean, I'm pretty sure they can, but unfortunately, updating your appearance, this ain't no Saints Row 9. So
Anne
it's
Rice
right across
vampires
from.
would not be able to get tattoos because they're stuck as they were when they
It's
died.
true, they can't even cut their hair. Which does, I mean, it makes sense. It explains vampire regeneration really easily.
When we get into the whole thing where Claudia is a representation of her child who died, he was going to be in Anne Rice's mind as forever stuck as a child, so it's part of the tragedy of that.
Yeah. Those first couple of Anne Rice books had a lot going on. They're really good.
I've only read an interview. Uh,
I read, and it has been a while. I always feel like they need to stipulate this because I do not have an uncanny personal recall, and things do fade from my memory. Um, but several years ago, I did read through Queen of the Damned. So it was Interview, the vampire. I forget what the second one was even called, and then Queen of the Damned. If there was one in between, then I missed it.
I've heard that the later books have actual, like, explicitly gay characters, which makes me a little more interested. Uh,
Yeah, like I've heard that the later books get a lot more self-indulgent, which
uh,
I mean, in fairness, there's a lot of the criticism of the Schumacher Batman movies basically just boiled down to homophobia. Like they were fine. So I love how like we find a phone number in this is where McGee, the guy that the bounty hunter we're looking for, was looking for.
uh,
So this is where he was supposed to be hiding out. We come down here, we see that this guy has an appointment with Gimble's Prosthetics. There's a phone number and an address, so we pick up the phone and we just call the number, and Gimble just rolls with it when we're like, "Oh yeah, no, we're not McGee. We're just using his phone," and he just rolls with it.
I guess at some point with Anne Rice, at some point Christopher Rice comes out of the closet, so I wonder if that influences her writing at all.
I'd expect so. I mean, it seems like her writing is driven a lot by, personal events, and which is true of a lot of writers.
And I think he rebels against his mother by doing that photo shoot where he's a twink werewolf.
I mean, I'd accuse you of putting him up to it, but I don't think you were old enough at the time.
I don't even think I was born.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly when it was, but I think you were a maximum of like 5. So,
And if I had anything to do with it, he would have been a twink mummy.
oh yes, of course.
Listeners, Chamomile will try to tell you that at one point he ran a game for me where I played a werewolf, and it's just not true. Anything he says about a character named Zeke Brandt is it's a lie.
What about Shane McCaskill? Is that one a lie too?
That is also a lie.
Truly, I have a fertile imagination. The depths of my deceptions are unbounded.
Convenient blood trail that we're following.
I'm actually not sure if that's relevant to the current. I think there might just be blood trails lying around. Apparently, this is how Santa Monica do in the world of darkness. Which I looked it up, by the way. Santa Monica is like a tourist hotspot in the real world.
That's what I thought. Like I thought like Santa Monica is like pretty hoity-toity.
Okay, I need blood. Ah, did it work? Finally, I managed to feed on someone in an alleyway without getting spotted.
I'm on a blood drive.
Hello! Welcome to Gimble's Prosthetics and Medical Supplies.
So as we're about to get into here,
Doing job?
Gimble's Prosthetics is a very well paced and not very realistically sized
If you don't mind
building.
me saying so. Oh,
Get into that with some RPGs where the levels feel like they were built to be dungeons and not places that people exist in.
give me a few moments to get my
Which I understand why that happens, but
So yeah, I think it was the right choice in this case. I'll get into it in a bit when we actually get inside, but it's definitely, while I was going through this, every time I go through this, I always think like, man, this guy owns a lot of subterranean real estate.
especially I imagine Santa Monica rent is pretty high.
Yeah, so there's a cool thing. You can wait for a while, because he says that he'll be right back. And so, for the record, the intended experience is that you wait in this sort of nice facade here for at least 15, 20, 30 seconds. Eventually the player is going to get bored, step through, and then, everything suddenly gets a lot creepier. And most players run all the time, so for pacing's sake, we're going to do that here. See, this is his office, which, it looks pretty serial killer in here. That's
Yeah.
got a blood pack in there. That's convenient for us, but also what the fuck.
A lot of serial killers, in fiction, they seem to take inspiration from Ed Gein. He may not have technically been a serial killer, because I think we only have 2 confirmed kills from him. But but it was the 50s, and like this sort of thing, like when it got in the news, it got hugely disproportional attention because that sort of thing didn't make the news, and he was digging up bodies and turning them into stuff.
Yeah, so here we have a mattress with scorch marks, indicating
It's
some
probably
kind of
fine.
long-term habitation of this. It's not locked, but it's got bars. So we have to presume it can be. I'm sure this is all perfectly normal prosthetics equipment.
This is like 2005. When did Saw come out?
I think it was around the same time, actually.
I'm not a fan of the torture porn subgenre of horror at all.
It's shock horror, which and this
Like,
one kind of
I really,
implies that it's going on without actually, asking you to sit down for 70 minutes of it, which so yeah, this guy has like 3 floors in his basement, but it does get steadily worse and worse in a way that's ruined a little bit because I dissected it on the way down, but it's it is a pretty good atmosphere, despite the fact where it's like, holy shit, man, who did you hire to build all this, and what did they think?
and again, the rent.
Right? Are you not giving me blood? Oh, there it goes. Ah, I didn't stock up on bullets. Oh, well, you don't have a whole lot of health. Fortunately, I don't get any masquerade violations for, showing off my ability to extract blood with my mind. Once again, just fantastic animation on that skirt there.
Thanks, man. I wasn't sure I was gonna make it. I'm telling you, I've been on some weird cases, but this one takes the cake.
Yeah, it's crazy how his blood just spontaneously came out of his body without me doing anything.
Man, that's solid. I owe that guy big.
It was real convenient.
Way to get him back for this. What? Oh no, man, no, not for me anymore. Look at my hand. Gimble took my trigger finger for a trophy.
Learn how to shoot left-handed.
I hate to leave Arthur in a lurch, but that's just the way it is.
This voice actor is relatively weak for the series, I feel like.
Yeah, there's a couple of voice actors where you can really tell they had a role to fill, and so they just grabbed a programmer out of a cubicle.
Thanks again. Don't worry, I'll take care of old Stumpy here.
I'll take care of old Stumpy here, he says, while immediately fleeing the premises. I guess he means he's going to come back later?
Also, that's kind of,
You
a
okay,
little
buddy?
cruel to refer to somebody.
I think he's going to be fine. It's not clear whether or not he's talking about Gimble, who has himself a prosthetic, or
Oh, I didn't notice.
McGee, who has, had most of his limbs removed. Because, yeah, if he's talking about Gimble, then, in fairness, that guy is a psycho. If he's talking about McGee, then it is kind of like, what the hell, man? Yeah, McGee is unconscious if not dead. It's really not clear. His stumps do appear to have been bandaged up, but he's also lost 3 limbs. And I'm not sure how much I trust Gimble's medical expertise. It's funny, in games you have to spread things out more, getting into just how massive this place is. You could have compacted all this a lot more down if you wanted a perfectly realistically proportioned thing, but the problem is when you're walking around, even in a first person view, and it gets worse in third, in a video game, the relative imprecision of the controls makes everything feel a lot more cramped. Right? Like,
Yeah, that's fair.
imagine how annoying it is having to navigate through an area in a video game with even very low barriers, like 1 foot tall barriers. In real life, it is a mild inconvenience, in a video game, it makes, it feels like you're walking on a shattered floor. And wow, the walk animation and those stairs just consistently
It's
flips that skirt
amazing.
right up. All
As
right.
your consultant on man sexiness, I can offer no opinion. So we gotta get seduction up to 3.
Yeah.
And it says this time you're supposed to send me $200.
See, this is why I have to make sure that you've got the pin open there, because I completely forgot about that. Indeed, I can't remember what that's for, but I must have wrote it down for something. So I'll since this is in addition to your generous retainer for your consultancy.
So I guess if you wanted to have a place that had sprawled out places, you'd have to set your RPG in like somewhere in flyover country.
Yeah.
Relatively Vampire the Masquerade, Salt Lake City.
I mean, even Salt Lake City, when you're in the city, rent is, it's not Santa Monica high or, Los Angeles high in general, since Santa Monica is apparently super run down in this version, so presumably rent is cheaper, but not that much cheaper. It's, if you want to be this sprawled out, then what you need is like Vampire the Masquerade Pleasant Grove, which is a city that I'm positive you have never heard of on account of, it is a tiny little city. It is the city that is well known in Utah for being between 2 other cities that people care about. Alright, so that's bounty hunting. What else can we do? Oh, that's right. There's something we can do back in that parking garage. Firstly, so I missed this entirely. I caught that we got the purse, but when we investigated the diner, we discovered that E's former beau, Lily, had a bail bond for some Rolf fella. So now we're just going to go check the local parking garage and see if, by total coincidence, his car is still around.
No. I mean, that seems kind of unlikely.
Yeah, this might seem like a ludicrous Hail Mary, but
I'm not sure.
but I can't think of how to finish that
to
sentence.
Or maybe they would. I don't know. The viewer has not told us their opinions on anything yet.
It's true. They're an enigma. Watching. We don't have any proof that our viewer is a servant of the beholder, but we don't have any proof that they're not. Oh my.
I want a second tire iron.
A diary. It's funny. If you want to ferry them back and forth, you can actually... Okay. So from here on in, we're good for blood. That's going to be helpful. But yeah, if you want to, you can sell your current tire iron, come back, pick up this one, sell that one too. Like, you can't stack melee weapons. You can't have more than one of each kind in your inventory. But if you have the patience, they do persist. You can come back for them.
I like to imagine that Kotula is carrying everything around in her Barnes & Noble book bag.
So yeah, here we have Lily. She has a fling with Rolf. He turns her into a vampire. He is feeding her out of the blood bank. Lily is a thin blood, so Rolf doesn't want her anymore. His visa expired, so that's why she had to bail him out and got a bail bond. And then she meets E. She hits it off with E. She decides the obvious thing to do is to turn him into a vampire without explaining anything.
As you do. So what do we think of the concept of thin bloods?
This is, broadly speaking, an okay idea, not great in execution, which is sort of a general theme with the old World of Darkness. It's one of the reasons why Bloodlines, why I love it so much, is because it takes a bunch of ideas from the old World of Darkness that are good, zoomed out, and then gives them a zoomed in treatment that is better than you usually get from your average OWAD splat book. For example,
Like,
the OWAD Ghoul splat book is trying really hard to be edgy all the time about how, oh yeah, the ghouls are slaves who are mind controlled into adoring their masters even as they hate them, and like there's something to that, but just being relentlessly grimdark about it is just boring.
exhausting.
Yeah, and you get a much better look at ghouls in this. Like, I don't think I've done the conversation in this one, but if you talk to Mercurio about LaCroix, who is his vampiric sugar daddy, uh, he'll mention about how his opinion on LaCroix is a moot point, and you kind of wonder what he thinks about that, and there's no option to, pry for more details on it, which I like to imagine is that, Mercurio doesn't really want to talk about this, which is fair. But, it sort of gives you a perspective on this ghoul. He has been ghouled by a vampire because he is a useful, high-class kind of criminal. And, what is his opinion on that? Well, he does his job. He tries not to think about how fucked up his situation really is. And that's kind of compelling.
I feel like the thing with the generations is something that would work more in a fiction setting than in a RPG setting. I don't like having that sort of definitive power level in the, well, not like having your power level explicitly tied to your generation in an RPG setting is kind of annoying. Like, that should be independent. There should be a way to advance that without having to
Yeah.
to drain vampires, which is a significant crime in the vampire community for obvious reasons. It kind of like throws a monkey wrench in character advancement.
Yeah. Uh, I think generation would be fine if it weren't literally generation. Like, you would want to call it something else, like blood potency or something. And
which is what NWAD did.
yeah, and then it's fine if its starting value is based on your generation, but you should be able to boost it through other means than just drinking older vampires. It's definitely in single author fiction. You can have a story where someone is a low generation vampire, and that is just something they're stuck with and have to live with forever. But that's because it's single author fiction, and they can get away with shit like that.
That's another thing where, like, I don't believe they didn't read Anne Rice until the very end, because she's the one who came up with that. Like, that's just a big thing with the Queen of the Damned.
Like, she is the one who came up with that, and also, like, I don't believe that they didn't read that, and I'm pretty sure we mentioned this before on camera. And if it were true, then they should be smacked for it anyway. Like, they're trying to come off like, oh yeah, we're just so creative, we just came up with all this stuff on our own. But, like, even if that were true, that just means that they got phenomenally lucky that they just ignored a massively important part of their source material. The game came out in 1991. It was long after Anne Rice was thoroughly entrenched as being very important to the vampire genre. And it's like, yeah, they're trying to come across like they did it all themselves, but not only is it an obvious lie, but it just, yeah, no, you should be familiar with your source material. What the fuck?
Like, this is not like, oh, we didn't read The Good Lady Duquesne before doing our vampire game.
Right?
Let me go. Beautiful. Like I'm going to die.
Like, this is not obscure in any sense.
Yeah, no, it's a major milestone. It's like it's as important as Dracula to the genre.
Let me go.
We don't need money that badly.
I'm trying to think of, like, what the big, like, what more recent, like, vampire literature would be that I would consider important.
I mean, Twilight is definitely really popular. I do think it's a bit of an evolutionary dead end. Like I don't think
Yeah,
it's
it
a
kind of ended up.
milestone. I don't think it's a milestone in the vampire uh, genre. I think it carved out the paranormal romance genre, which is different.
I also
Um,
like it didn't really impact how we see vampires at all.
right.
Like the romantic vampire was already a thing.
Yeah, like it was definitely a big deal, but people still remember it. You can make direct references to it, but its most famous successor was a completely mundane romance story.
It's kind of like it's this old thing with like I've heard this described as the Ghostbuster, where you have a blockbuster that makes $1 billion, but then does have no impact on the cultural scene. Which the big example of that being Avatar, which yeah, that
Yeah.
came out and it made $1 billion, and everyone forgot it in a year, and it had no impact on our broader culture.
Funny enough, the actual Ghostbusters was not really an example of that.
Yeah,
It's that one had some lasting impact.
uh, I feel like the only thing I can think of, like, it didn't make a huge impact on the culture, but it's such a good example of vampire literature is The Coldest Girl in Cold Town.
Yeah, like that one has not exploded, but my god, there's definitely some fantastic stuff to mine from that. Like
Like, that is an amazing world, post Masquerade world.
it is. It's the only take on it that I've really liked. I did not get very deep into True Blood, in fairness. I saw the TV show version, I watched a couple of episodes of it, and I bounced off of it, not even because it was poorly done, right? Like, I could appreciate on a technical level its cinematography and design and acting was all perfectly fine, but it was just kind of like, I'm not here for this kind of drama, so,
You're not really the audience.
yeah.
Like, there's a Family Guy joke. Who watches True Blood? Well, rich gay people watch True Blood, and that's fairly accurate.
Oh, about tonight, what I did? Please don't tell Eve. It's not my fault. I couldn't control it. I've never done anything like this before. I'm no character.
I mean, definitionally you are. You just killed someone.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good for humanity too, actually.
Like, I liked True Blood up until like I don't remember what season. Like, I am kind of the audience for True Blood, but at some point it kind of went off the rails.
No, I mean every TV show, it either gets mourned for getting canceled too soon, or it goes on long enough to turn to shit. So,
I've not read the Southern Vampire Mystery series that it's based off of. Uh,
But it's kind of chilly out, and
the author used to live in Arkansas.
devoured, I'm feeling solo.
I never met her. I've had people ask me that.
It's actually when you said that you never met her, my first thought was like, well, yeah, how many people live in Arkansas? Like, sure, it's a little podunk state, but there's still like 2 million people in there.
You're off by a factor of 3.
Really? In what
Yeah, there's
direction?
6 million in Arkansas.
Oh yeah, that is actually more populous than Utah.
Oh,
Not by a lot, but
but then Salt Lake City is much more of a real city than Little Rock is.
it's yeah. No, Utah is 2 cities, a mid-sized city and a pretty small city, surrounded by just miles and miles of wasteland.
The bitch who owns me and this place runs the asylum. Lots of young, stupid.
So here's another example of a ghoul,
Like that
where this guy really does the obsessive love-hate thing, where he clearly despises his master, but cannot break away from her because of
It's
his
again
supernatural
like
compulsion.
we've talked about this of RPG settings, and World of Darkness has always been bad about this, about trying to force certain things onto the game. Like, it's fine to have that be an archetype of the ghoul, but every single ghoul does not need to be that.
Right.
The world is more interesting if some ghouls have different relationships to being a ghoul.
Yeah, like Bertram Tongue's ghoul, I forget his name, but we've met him already. he's like, he loves this shit. Like, he thinks
Oh, that
Bertram
kind of
Tongue is
annoying guy in the
awesome.
club.
Yeah, yeah. Like, he thinks Tongue is awesome, and he thinks being a ghoul is awesome, and he thinks vampires are awesome. Like, he's clearly kind of cracked out, but it's not like there's health side effects to being a ghoul. It's actually, like, supernaturally health promoting. So, like, it makes you ludicrously resistant to injury, and it prevents you from aging for as long as you're on the stuff. Like, it has some pretty serious addiction problems, which makes us think of things like meth and cocaine, where it will destroy your body over time. But it's actually exactly the opposite. Besides the side effects of the social side effects of having this drug dealer relationship with whoever happens to be feeding you blood, like, that's the only downside to being a ghoul. And so how much of a downside that is really depends just so much on who is the one giving you blood. Which is, that's an interesting dynamic, There are some people whose lives are absolute horror shows because they've been ghouled, and there are some people for whom it's basically a straight upgrade. Which is, and that is how Bloodlines handles it. With the ghouls sourcebook, every clan has like a different approach to ghouls in that sourcebook. They each get their own little chapter. Well, it's sub-chapter, but it's like that one chapter takes up like half the book, so they're basically little chapters. But like, all of them are bad. Like, being a Toreador ghoul, in general, like, if we're going to assume that Toreadors all have basically the same personality, which this book does, so whatever, you would think that being ghouled by the people who, love art and beauty, like, that seems like it should just mostly work out.
Yeah.
But no, it has to be shitty for some reason. So there's this whole thing where they are flighty and quickly grow tired of their ghouls and discard them, and that causes the ghouls to go crazy from withdrawal.
You think I'm really?
Observe the fantastic flirtation and seduction writing of this game.
Which, admittedly, Cam and I do not have that much room to criticize.
It's true. It's not like we're any good at it ourselves. It's just,
We've sat around trying to figure out how do you write a flirtation scene, and we've just sort of been like,
But, yeah, I was hoping to ignore this whole thing almost completely, but it turns out that feeding from alleyways is a lot trickier, and I wonder if it's part of the patch. Did the stealth patch have this effect? But,
Really? And what are you bringing to the party, huh? Got anything I can't get out in Arizona? Everyone at this place is so straight edge.
I'm gonna be
no, in
honest,
chamomile.
I'm only here to harvest your blood. Not even in the sense of personally drinking it. No, that's for the girl downstairs. You are being literally factory farmed for the stuff.
Enough of this place anyway.
Alright.
No, in chamomile and I's defense on the flirtation thing, I'm fairly certain flirtation is a thing invented for fiction, right? Like, it's not something that people do in real life.
Well, I mean, obviously. Like, I feel some obligation to know how it's allegedly supposed to work just because, I am a creator. I write fiction. But, clearly, like, the idea that you could just say the right words at someone and make them more romantically attracted to you, that's magic. That's spells.
Are goth clubs still a thing?
I mean, not in Salt Lake City, but that ain't saying much, so.
I mean, I feel like that would be, were they ever a thing in Salt Lake City?
I wouldn't know. I was not nearly old enough because, it's easy to look up the history of a scene or a culture through its musical releases and its concerts because people record that shit, their events. But clubs, that stuff is invisible to me.
Like, I feel like I feel like you can qualify as being a goth in Salt Lake City by just wearing a black collared shirt.
I mean, probably. I'm not sure if it's possible to qualify as a goth in Salt Lake City. There would have to be an actual goth subculture for you to be a part of. You know, they
That
are
is
the ones who
fair.
would make that judgment, and I don't know if there's one around here. Um, okay, so I did bounty hunting. I did... Oh, that's right. I need to finish up bounty hunting. I just need to go and collect some rewards, mostly. See if I can boost my hacking ability. How high is that right now? Yeah, that needs to be a little bit higher. So yeah, I'm going to want at least one more XP so I can boost hacking to 4. And then Auspex should get that high enough to hack anything in Santa Monica. And, you know, I now
We need to
have...
call.
Huh?
We need to call our general manager and let him know that we're feeling sick, so we're not going to be in today. Can you please cover our shift? Like, I know we were supposed to help him with the book signing and work on reshelving the books and children, but we're just feeling a little under the weather.
That's right. I don't need the crime pewter. I need just to talk to you.
What? Ain't coming back? What do you mean he ain't coming back? Man, that's a tough one. Bounty hunter ain't no good without his trigger finger. Well, hell, that really leaves me in hot water.
I wonder how true that is in the real world. That a bounty hunter isn't
I
any good
mean-
without his trigger finger.
I feel like you're really not supposed to be shooting people. Like, just because you have a bounty on them, you're not really supposed to be shooting them. Like,
Yeah, I mean, bounties, I don't know if dead or alive is even like a legal bounty to post. Like,
I'm pretty sure it's
you're-
alive.
yeah, like I'm pretty sure you're only allowed to post bounty for capture.
Like, even that is something that, like, that's kind of a particularly American thing, apparently. Like, Dog the Bounty Hunter got arrested in Mexico because bounty hunting is straight up illegal in Mexico.
Seems like the kind of thing that would be an American thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no body attachment or nothing. Just find out if he's here or where he went. I'll pay you. Deal? Great, all right. The guy's name is Mike Durbin. Goes by the name Muddy. His girlfriend put up for his bond. She lives over there above Tripp's pawn shop. Her name is Marion Murrieta, but I haven't been able to get in touch with her. Well, I wouldn't normally tell you this, but since you did help me out, Trip down at the pawn shop. He's a little fried.
Yeah, I don't need Trip's little pea shooters. Tell me where I can get an automatic shotgun.
We'll set you up all right. That's right, Marianne Murrieta. In them crappy places.
Which we gotta help Mercurio out when it comes up later on. Because he is an arms dealer, and we want his machine guns.
I never would have guessed. He seems so, upright.
Right?
Upstanding citizen.
Yeah, it takes a shocking amount of time for you to get your hands on some real firepower. It could totally make sense here in Santa Monica. You're freshly turned. The whole theme of this place is that you're still, you know, you're new to the vampire conspiracy. But the deeper you get into it, the deeper you get into things. Especially,
This
I'm getting
Doomsayer
ahead of...
seems to be in contact with the corruption. Like, that's a proto-Jane Prentice right over there.
Yeah. And he's making a bunch of Werewolf the Apocalypse references, which, since there's only one real werewolf scene in this game, that feels like as good of a segue into any as to why Werewolf the Apocalypse wasn't very good.
Well, Yeah, and I guess since you are the werewolf expert,
Yeah, like I guess I'll have to carry this conversation because Requiem definitely doesn't like werewolves. He's into mummies. He definitely didn't, play in a World of Darkness knockoff campaign. We won't get into the details of the system, it doesn't matter. But a World of Darkness knockoff campaign for like 9 months where he played a werewolf. He definitely isn't writing a novel about a werewolf. That would all be ridiculous.
that would be ridiculous.
Zeke Brandt is a made up name, which is
It is.
actually true. But
There's probably people named Zeke Brandt.
it's true. Yeah, okay, that's fair.
And like, there's probably a lot of them in Texas specifically. Like, Texas has a very large German population.
Wow. It's almost like at one point you sat down and asked yourself, what would a werewolf from Texas plausibly be named? What kind of names are common in that region? And you went and you looked some things up, and you picked out a name you liked for a werewolf. But that would be ridiculous.
That would be ridiculous.
But Werewolf the Apocalypse, the problem is that it's werewolves don't tend to make great settings on their own. Like, so to back up for a bit, people who are even just familiar with vampire purely through Bloodlines, which is fair. In the old World of Darkness, originally each monster type was supposed to be its own setting with a very similar tone, but not necessarily the same actual world as the other monster types. They backpedaled on this in a big way over time. They peeled it back more and more over time. So it started out as like, there is a faint possibility that these worlds might actually be related. It eventually became like, yeah, no, they are explicitly the exact same thing. So originally, the werewolves from Old World of Darkness, from Werewolf the Apocalypse. This is actually a quest item. I can't do anything except give it to Trip. Except Trip doesn't want it because I never got that quest from him. Oh well. So Werewolf the Apocalypse was, yeah, originally there was vague hints that possibly they had something in common with the werewolves that showed up in Vampire, but it was supposed to be a fully separate setting that wasn't necessarily compatible. And that meant that they had to have an entire werewolf conspiracy, an entire world that was built around being a werewolf. And the problem is that werewolves are actually quite localized. Werewolf society doesn't tend to go beyond the pack, which is you and your 5 or so mates running around the woods and then going to get Denny's together. So when they expanded it out into a conspiracy, they turned it into this whole apocalypse thing where you're eco-terrorists fighting against a giant corporation that is serving like this entropy god who is referenced a couple of times by that crazy doomsayer. He talks about the worm. The entropy god is called the worm, which is
But with
some
a Y.
kind of, yeah. It's like a dragon-y kind of thing, but you don't ever actually fight it personally, so it doesn't matter.
Like, the thing is, like, if you were a person who is into werewolves, you're into them as they are in the sort of broader pop culture, and Werewolf the Apocalypse, and Forsaken has this problem too, are coming up with this entirely new thing. It's this unique cosmology that they've made up. It's a bunch of stuff with the spirit world that doesn't really feature in most werewolf fiction. It's this whole global conspiracy that's not a thing in werewolf fiction. It basically feels, in both of them, it feels like you're really playing a shaman who just happens to have a wolf motif. And the other thing is, if you are a player who wants to be a werewolf and you come to the table, you probably want being a werewolf to be your character's shtick. You don't want
Not that you would know
everybody at the
anything about
table. Not that I would have any idea. Not that I have ever played a werewolf in a game, and then had Chamomile just torment my character for 9 months. Which I will get my revenge at some point.
For the thing that didn't happen.
You want, like, probably the werewolf pack of the game should just be like your characters supporting NPCs, and then everybody else is playing probably a vampire. Werewolves as a concept haven't had as much cultural impact, so there's less you can do with them. Like with vampires, like you can hit 13 pretty distinct clans and have them look like wider pop culture vampires pretty easily. You can't really do that with werewolves except by like maybe doing different animals, but like different animal lycanthropes have diminishing returns like super fast. Like
Yeah.
even just adding werecats is a huge drop from werewolves, and then
Yeah,
anything
like it's
past that, you're
still
kind of getting into
like
also
werecats,
rams.
wererats, werebears even, I would say. That's like you're definitely you're definitely well into the territory there where it's like we're trying to find other lycanthropes to do besides werewolf, but like there's something to that. Like a werecat or a werebear, it doesn't seem so much like you would expect a protagonist of a Monster Mash kind of game to be. Uh, but it
But it's
does
like
feel
cat
like
people and sleepwalkers were movies.
yeah, and it does feel like something that would exist. Like you would encounter that, it would probably be as a supporting character or an antagonist, but in a Monster Mash kind of conspiracy setting, which is what Old World of Darkness turned into anyway. So we may as well admit that players want that. Uh, like you could do an all vampires game, but that is the only one you could do of just one monster type. And at that point, it seems like you're just being a dick to the werewolf player because the dude only needs one werewolf.
Yeah, like honestly, for your vampire game, you might as well have like your 5 starting clans and your 6th starting clan is a werewolf. And I guess as long as we're on this topic, we should talk about gangrels. Like
Yeah,
you
especially
might as
because
well.
they rarely come up. Like there's not a point in the plot where they come up. Where the other 7 or the other 6 rather Camarilla clans, there is some kind of point in the plot where they come up and it makes sense to talk about them. And I was thinking about this earlier. That never happens for gangrels. There's no gangrel section of this game. So
Like there's a
before we
couple
move on
of
though, I do
gangrel
want to say
NPCs.
you could come up with 13 vampire clans, you know, but I feel like, and this is a totally unsubstantiated guess here, but just like my general feeling is that if you tried to come up with like as many really good vampire clans for a tabletop RPG as you could, that where each one had like a really meaningfully different sort of a cultural background and method of feeding or some other major thematic difference that sort of gets into how, you know, you don't want your Brujah to be the punks because the Anarchs are the punks. So taking that as your standard, I feel like you'd be hard pressed to get past 11. 11 specifically feels like the number you would get stuck at. No reason, just guessing.
I mean, I thought we hit 9.
I'm pretty sure we got to 11, and then 9 was a spookier number, and so we consolidated a little bit because a couple of the ones from the 11 were really reaching.
Yeah. The thing with Gangrel is they only exist for when you say, I'm running a vampire game, and you have the one character who's like, okay, one player who's like, okay, I want to play a werewolf. You're like, okay, well, here's a Gangrel. It's a vampire who's a werewolf. And, like,
Yeah.
I hate that type of player race in general. Like, don't give the weak T version of the monster race to the player. Either let them play it or don't. Like, there are some, like, half type races that people legitimately want to do. Like, I think, like, being part demon instead of full demon is something that some people will legitimately want. Like the Cambion is a thing,
Right, yeah.
or even like part
Because
dragon. I think you could pull off half elf. Weirdly enough, I feel like has a certain amount of cultural cachet. But then like this is getting into Pathfinder. Like they have skinwalkers who are basically half werewolves, and they got Dampiers who aren't like the folkloric Dampiers, but are just half vampires, and they're just weak T vampire, weak T werewolf. It's like figure out a way the player can be a werewolf or a vampire. Don't do this half version stuff. And especially in Vampire, like they were building that game from the ground up. They very easily could have made it so werewolf was about on the level of a vampire and could just be included in the game. It would have been that much of a stretch.
They didn't need to make every werewolf automatically a, you know, nightmare super monster who is just, you know, ungodly dangerous, which is how it is in Old World Darkness for the record. But like there was no need to do that. Like you can have your nightmare super monster werewolves. They can just be werewolves who are particularly stroppy. Like that can coexist with werewolves who are, basically on the same level as like a Bruja, a combat monster vampire.
Like even in a lot of like vampire fiction, usually you get to the second book, that's when werewolves show up.
Right?
Like Twilight, second book, the werewolves show up. Uh, I know Dresden Files isn't vampire fiction, but the first book's vampires, and I think the second book is werewolves.
That sounds right.
Because the first one is there's something with the Red Court.
Which brings up another thing. We talked about this earlier with the Tremere, about how if someone wants to play if someone says they want to play a vampire wizard, then what they're really saying is that they want to play a vampire with glasses, which is fine. But you don't need to make an actual vampire wizard, particularly because that then leaves room for someone to play an actual wizard, Dresden style. Like, there's definitely, if you're making a Monster Mash game, and again, Old World of Darkness, New World of Darkness, they both went that direction eventually. New World of Darkness, benefiting from experience, knew to lay the groundwork for that immediately. But if you're making
But
a monster,
very, very, very poorly.
yeah, it did it poorly because they were still trying to do one book per creature type, right? They were still trying to pretend that like changelings were the equal to vampires in terms of like cultural cachet. That someone would want to buy a changeling book as anything but a splat book for their vampire game, and that's really not it. Like, even werewolf players, and werewolves are less popular than vampires, but they're popular enough that you could plausibly find a group of people who all wanted to play as werewolves. But that feels like a concept campaign, not like an RPG premise, right? Like,
the more likely thing is you've got three people who are vampires and one's the werewolf.
Right. And yeah, like the all werewolf campaign feels like it's the all dwarf campaign from D&D, right? Totally playable, you can do that, but it's a concept campaign. Yeah, it's a specific campaign premise. You wouldn't make the all dwarf RPG, like, because once you've already got dwarves, it's so easy to broaden your appeal by also adding in elves and halflings. Like, why would you not do that? Why would you limit yourself to that? Why would you try to make a separate elf RPG? You're clearly going to have to copy so many mechanics from the dwarves anyway. You're just wasting paper. And that is how a lot of the World of Darkness, especially Old World of Darkness books went. Is that, they copied a ton of mechanics over when there was really only, maybe a third of the book was really new content.
Well, New World of Darkness had the problem where they had come up with a formula and they used it in every thing, and it made each monster type feel very similar. So you've got the five sort of like your actual monster type, and then you've got the five factions, and then you have what they call the V splat, which is like an extra thing that you could add on to your character, and it made them all feel very similar. And it's like, again, like most monster concepts do not need a cosmology attached to them. Like even for vampires, you don't really need it. Like you can have like vampires interacting with demons and ghosts, but like you don't need it. Then like werewolves, like you don't need a cosmology for werewolves at all. You don't need a cosmology for like the Frankenstein monster.
Generally
like,
speaking, most monsters need a history that goes back a maximum of 1,000 years. It's very rare that there's any utility to describe what went on, even in the classical era, let alone the creation of the world.
Like, I think if you were doing a new World of Darkness rather than just rebooting the old World of Darkness, you'd really just start at Vampire, and then everything beyond that is an expansion of Vampire. Like, it's not trying to be its own thing.
Not that we put any serious thought into this.
Not that we... No, of course not.
Getting out of LA soon. Too dangerous here. Rosa told us something big's about to happen, and I don't want to be here when the jack comes out of the box. Take that for what you will.
On a totally unrelated topic, are you into Hong Kong vampire cinema at all, Chamomile?
I mean, I don't want to say I'm into it because that would imply that I've seen a lot of it, and I haven't, but I've liked what I've seen.
Any movies stand out?
Well, there was one in particular that I really liked. I thought it had a really catchy name. I forget what it was though.
Yeah, it's on the tip of my tongue as well.
It's like I liked the movie, but like I liked the name so much that I kind of like kept on using it for other things, and it kind of stuck to a certain project. But I can't. I'm totally blanking on any other detail besides that.
I think it's called Master Nosferatu.
Definitely, yeah, that sounds right. And we just need to drop by the blood bank and hack controlled substances with the power of Auspex. Have I gotten up to... Yeah, I'm up to hacking 4, so that should be fine. And we will then have finished up our side quest to Palooza, so... Yeah. Granted, I mainly got a bunch of XP that allowed me to finish other side quests with the XP that I got from those side quests. But, having better...
It's kind of heartbreaking.
Well, I mean, having better hacking and seduction and stuff is going to come in handy later. Because
Yeah.
clubs, it turns out, are going to be our primary source of blood. I thought we could go with alleyways. I was wrong. I got like 3 masquerade violations out of that. It was going to be a problem eventually.
It is kind of heartbreaking that this type of game is basically dead. Like isometric games have had their revival, but I don't feel like this sort of game would have to be AAA, and the AAA is converged into all AAA games are the same sort of like shooter with some RPG elements.
Yeah, that, or they're an open world action game, which, like, I like those, but I definitely don't like the fact that they're every game. It's like, I'm relatively keen on Assassin's Creed games, but we definitely have too many of them, and they're definitely a popcorn kind of game, where it's like, yeah, if the movement controls are good, then I'll have fun running around stabbing people. But, yeah, it's a very... oh, the gameplay just feels so good kind of thing. It's not an immersive experience the way this one is, which I realize sounds pretentious, but god damn it, this game has earned it.
Like I don't think Cyberpunk 2070 or the Bloodlines 2 are going to really do this. They're going to be this sort of more shootery.
I mean, The Witcher 3 did not have a customizable character, right? But within the constraints that you are being Geralt, and Geralt can be, Geralt can have good days and he can have bad days, there is a range of behavior within that character that does make sense. It had some fairly extensive role-playing options. So I am cautiously optimistic about Cyberpunk. Bloodlines 2, like, I won't say it's abandon hope, all ye who enter here, right? Like, it's not a doomed project or anything, but it's, as far as I can tell, it's Bloodlines in name only, so it's as likely to be a really great RPG as any other RPG, which is to say, not very.
I feel like the association with Paradox is a little bit worrisome, since, if only because of their very predatory DLC model.
And people say that, and I've never really felt it. Like, they come out with a lot of DLC. Buying all the DLC is extremely expensive, but half of it is cosmetic. If you don't think it's pretty, you can give it a miss. And the other half of it is real significant expansions upon the games they make. I
know in EU4 they started making it so the patches nerfed you if you didn't have the DLC.
And I never really played EU4, so it is entirely possible that there's more to it that's just entirely slipped by me. I mainly play Crusader Kings 2 and Stellaris. And
I mainly played Crusader Kings and never felt like I had to have the DLC. Stellaris, I kind of fell off it just got boring. And like I know they've changed it a lot, but also like I'm afraid to go back to it just because I would be starting from the beginning because they've changed it so much since I last played. Like I'd be resetting because like I could do pretty well on a regular difficulty, and I would be back to being a beginner. And also, it's a gigantic time sink.
It is. Like, I believe the current count, they say that Paradox has released 3 games, all under the name Stellaris at this point. Not to say that they've released Stellaris 2 and 3, to be clear. They have released 3 different games under the name Stellaris specifically. No numbering. They just totally redesigned the game twice.
Also, in Crusader Kings, having your character be gay used to be basically a straight bonus because what you could do, you could take gay as a flaw, and the penalty was it gives you a penalty to reproduction, having a child chance. But then you could just take lustful as another flaw, and lustful costs points because it increases your chance of having a kid. But homosexual not only cancels out the points spent on lustful, it's a net gain of points as a flaw. So it was advantageous to just be gay and lustful, but now they cost the same. So
ordinarily, I would be
I
running
miss
in these
that.
combat times, but I
You
feel
can't
like
damage you.
it is more in character in this case to just be totally blasé about. Optometry, get it? Because
It's
it's
their
the
eyes.
cameras.
I wonder if they serve the eye. This is basically a Magnus Archives Let's Play for anybody wondering.
Well, I mean, the Rusty Quill keeps turning down or refusing to answer our phone calls about developing the Magnus Archives RPG, so we're just going to do it
How
through
did you
Vampire
even get their
instead.
number?
Put a bunch of points into hacking.
Also, where are you getting the money to call London so often?
A bunch of points in lockpicking. By the way, if the FBI ever asks, you've never met me in person and have no idea where I live. And also, please make it strenuously clear to them that they definitely couldn't find out either of these things by watching this Let's Play.
All right.
That's fantastic. We can hack this with 4. By the way, Dr. Malcolm, there's a whole thing in the emails, if you dig into them, which we had enough hacking that we don't have to bother. But if you dig into the emails, you can see that some of Dr. Malcolm's coworkers have, as a prank, set his password for controlled substances to the name of his mistress that he's having an affair with. Which this clinic seems like a really shitty work environment just overall. Like really just absolutely awful. But it all worked out for the best for Dr. Malcolm because we frenzied and ate him. So, he don't have to worry about that no more. We're basically heroes.
Oh, hey, werewolf blood.
Yeah. Had some werewolf blood and controlled substances that they were going to send in for analysis. And LaCroix couldn't have that, so he sent us to go and get it out. Of course, we did so by... I love this, how we just walked in, got pumped full of like 8 bullets from the security guard, just walked into the security room, hacked the computer while he was shooting us, just nonchalantly strolled into the unlocked controlled substances. In retrospect, I'm not sure why we bothered turning off the cameras. Like, they know we're here. Did I did not get my free stealth book. Let me go find that in Santa Monica Apartments while I drop off the werewolf blood.
Wouldn't werewolf blood, like, just be human blood? Like, it makes sense that vampire blood does stuff and is different, but I feel like werewolf blood is like, it's human blood.
I could see arguments for it either way. Like, you could definitely have werewolf blood be especially scientifically indistinguishable from human blood. But I could also see a setting where doing weird things with blood is sort of the, oh man, your bullets actually hurt. You guys have better guns. Okay.
Did we get a masquerade violation? What happened? We may have fucked up at some point.
We broke into controlled substances and we didn't even try to sneak past the guard, so we called it in. So we broke the law, but it's fine. We didn't do anything masquerade-wise.
Okay. He didn't mention in his report that, like, I shot this girl like 10 times.
Yeah. He apparently thought that was totally normal. Maybe he thought that we're like one of those gangs from the Warriors, where they just have like really strong and bizarre theming. So we are the floor-length goth skirt and glasses gang. Yeah, we just have to wait it out for a second. The cops go on GTA rules, where, you know, if a criminal hasn't been spotted for the last 2-3 minutes, then they must not exist anymore.
In the meantime, I guess you can just heal. Were there rats you could feed from?
I mean, there are, if I want to eat rats. Okay.
I guess you don't.
I mean, it's disgusting. What do you take me for? A gangrel?